between punk and...
Punk and genre cinema. Horror, thrillers.
I think they're disrespectful in a really absolutely necessary way. I think they disregard conventions and the way you should do things, and I think that's really critical and really important to it. And I've always tried to apply that in the films. And the taste meisters, you know, the taste setters, the ones who say it should be done this way, it's the disrespect is shown to them, that you want them. So there's certain things that you see are like unacceptable, and that is the essence of it. And I love that about horror, for instance. It will always have that within it, that what you see. And there's a lot of stuff in 28 years later we can't show you because they won't put it in trailers until they do a Red Band trailer. But yeah, you'll see when you go to see the movie, hopefully. See, and you get it even now, you get people telling you, surely you should cut to this there. And you go, well, you just don't think like that, or you deliberately don't think like that because you want to upset the taste meisters, you know, the ones who are setting the taste of the way things should be. That's the idea, yeah.
The first couple of directing jobs you did, apart from theatre, were television, right? That's where you started, in Northern Ireland, if I'm correct?
Yeah, so I worked at a theatre in London called the Royal Court Theatre, which is a wonderful theatre for new writers. It specialises in new writing for the stage and gives you, as a training, a great respect for writers, which I still carry and has been enormously beneficial to me in my career. But then I didn't really know the theatre. I never went to the theatre until I was 16. I got a job in a theatre just to earn some money, and I was amazed at these plays, and they were the same every night, except they were different. You know, I was an usher, and they were kind of like, so it was amazing to see that. I'd never been in a theatre. It didn't really belong to my background. So I'd always wanted to do cinema, and I saw a job in Northern Ireland, and it was a very, very difficult time in Northern Ireland. It was a very dangerous time there, and they were advertising this job at the BBC there. But I knew, I had a mate who lived in Northern Ireland, so I used to go and visit him in Belfast, and I knew it wasn't dangerous. It was like, you know, it was just like anywhere. It's like there were regular people, good people. And so I applied for the job there and nobody else applied. I know that. They wouldn't appoint internally because it was too complicated, because if they gave it to a Catholic, it was like deemed one way. If they gave it to a Protestant, it was deemed another. So they wanted to appoint an outsider. And so I got the job. And I learned how to use a camera there, making these 1 hour films for drama films for television. And I directed some of them, and I got other directors over to direct. I had a friend called Alan Clark, wonderful director, who directed a film for us called Elephant, which is an extraordinary film if you've never seen it, and was a big influence on the subsequently titled Elephant by Gus Van Sant about Columbine, which was sort of its stylistic approach was based on this Alan Clark original Elephant set in Northern Ireland. Yeah.
Were you happy with the work you did there? Or did you see it as a learning curve?
Yeah, no, if you showed it now, I'd be really embarrassed. But especially we made one, I'm a big football fan, by the way. So I was just looking at your national stadium where Kevin De Bruyne plays, and it's a big deal for me, even though I've never met him or anything like that. Just to be around the whole thing about football. Anyway, I'm a big football. So the first film I made there was about football and about the discovery of a guy called George Best, a footballer called George Best. Those of you who love football will know. Anyway, but if you showed that film now, it'd be embarrassing, really. But I'd let you learn so much, you know, just like they're doing it. It is the way to do it. If you want to do it, just try it. And on whatever scale you can manage at, and you'll learn whether you can do it or not, or whether it suits you or not, or whether it's gonna. Anyway, yeah. So that's how I started.
Were you always working towards making a first feature film?
Yeah, but I remember writing. Do you know who David Putnam is? I remember writing to David Putnam, who was he produced Chariots of Fire. You know, he was like the big producer in Britain at the time. I remember writing to him constantly, never heard back from him. You know, all these people you wrote to, you never hear back from. So apologies if any of you have written to me and not heard back from me. It's just the way it is. But anyway, it was just useless. And eventually, I got this, I was doing bits of television and stuff like that, and did a couple of Inspector Morses. We did the first depiction of rave music and the rave scene of ecstasy on British television in an episode of Inspector Morse, which is a bit of trying to sneak a bit of the underground into Inspector Morse conventional television. And eventually, I got a script, and it was this script called Shallow Grave. And I went along to see him. There was these couple of young guys, Andrew MacDonald, the producer, and this writer, amazing writer called John Hodge. And I went along to see him, and I said, well, it's a rip-off of the Coen Brothers, isn't it? And John Hodge went, yeah, it is. I said, well, we should rip them off a bit more. We should do this with the script. So we got on really well, working on it, and we ended up getting £1 million to make the whole film, and we set off to make it in 30 days in Glasgow, even though it's set in Edinburgh. Yeah, we made it in Glasgow.
This was 94, 93, 94, I think.
Yeah.
But before we delve into that film, I suggest we watch a clip of it.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
How do you feel when you watch this?
Well, you can hear the influence of rave culture right there, because I was raving at the time. The music's by Left Field, who were a great band at the time, and it's amazing. There's this theory, which I think is basically true, which is that your first film is always your best film, and that it's an interesting theory because you get better as you become more experienced, but you don't necessarily make better films. And this is the argument, and the most compelling evidence of it is the Coen Brothers, who of course have made a series of extraordinary masterpieces. But if you, sitting in the bath alone at night, think, is there a better film than Blood Simple? Is any of their films better than Blood Simple, their first film? Probably not, because it's like, and my dad, he used to come along to see all my films, and he'd come along, this was up to and including Slumdog Millionaire, and then he passed away after that, but he'd watch them all and he'd say, yeah, it was good. But it wasn't as good as Shallow Grave. That was what he said after every single film, I promise you.
Yeah. The opening scene that we just watched, it's not grandstanding, but it is a kind of a calling card saying, well, we're here and we're a force to be reckoned with, because this was very different than the British films that were being made at the time. How much of that was intentional?
Yes, the script is extremely disrespectful. It's written by a doctor. He was a doctor. Doctors, I'm sure there's probably some in the house, make very good writers because they see us at our absolutely most vulnerable. All the terrible things we're capable of, I think doctors see, and consequently they have a lot of raw material that they can use. And you combine that with a very dark Scottish sense of humour, and you get a script like Shallow Grave, and therefore you want the film to reflect that, really, and be defiant, as the Scottish are. I mean, I wasn't a Scot. If you work in Scotland, you have to, with a Scottish film crew, you have to prove yourself, really, because they don't have very much time for the English, not really, and quite understandably as well. And so you have to prove yourself, and you have to prove that you're going to make a Scottish film, and it has to have a defiance in it, which is, stylistically, you want it to be clear you're going to watch something different than a period drama or a nice rom-com or whatever like that. And they're horrible, the three main characters. Yeah. Absolutely horrible.
Yeah, exactly. You're kind of daring the audience to watch the film because they're not very nice people.
Yeah, no, we were very lucky to get those three actors to do it. One of whom, Chris Eccleston, went on to be Doctor Who for a while. And Ewan McGregor obviously went on to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. So there were 2 out of 3 were masters of the universe. In one cast, that's pretty good.
You like to work with actors from Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland. Is there any particular reason for that?
Well, my background's Irish. All my family's from Ballinasloe in County Galway, and I spent a lot of time in the north of Ireland. I like the country, I like the people, I like the storytellers very, very much indeed. And I don't really, I'm from a northern town, so you tend to have a kind of like you tend to have an attitude to London, even though I live in London now. You tend to have an attitude to London, which is that it's not really for me, really. You tend to. So I work out of London whenever I can, and I love working with Irish and Scottish actors. Yeah, absolutely, and Welsh ones as well. I work with Jonathan Pryce, who's a wonderful actor from where a Welsh actor, a wonderful actor.
As you say, this was your first film that holds a special place in your heart. Do you see the mistakes as well? Or can you gloss over them?
No, you kind of like embarrassed by bits. You realize, but like when Ewan gets stabbed in the shoulder there like that, that's pretty dodgy, kind of dummy, and which you don't quite know how to craft around it. But I think that's partly the appeal of it, because like when the knife goes through his throat, I remember when that first. I mean, you're used to that kind of stuff now, but when that came out, I remember being in the audience, people gasped. Thought that was so that was pretty good. I was quite pleased about that. Kind of that bit of gore in it was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, you live with it obviously because you're a young man making it. Well, I wasn't that young, but I was not that experienced really. And we raised £1 million, and Channel 4 gave us the money, but they put in a guy. Understandably, from their point of view, it's quite a lot of money, £1 million. And they put in a guy on the set who was meant to keep an eye on us, and we didn't get on with him at all. It was quite tense, really. Anyway, the shot you see at the beginning, which is Christopher Eccleston's head going round, that was shot in a morgue, and it was meant to be circulating around him. And at the end of the film, the last shot of the film, is it pulls out and you realise he's dead. He's in a morgue. And you pull back. Anyway, we were doing that shot on the third day of filming, and we spent all morning trying to get this shot, and we couldn't get it. And this guy rang Channel 4 and said, we're going to be hugely behind. I think you should replace the director. So we found this out because we had a stooge in Channel 4 who told us this. So we rang Channel 4 and we said, we want to sack this guy. And they said, okay, you can sack him, but if you fall behind at all, we'll sack you. So it was like brinkmanship like that. But we got rid of him, and we went on, and we managed to finish on time. Though by the end, we were selling off the sofa, that nice sofa that you see them sitting on. We were selling off the furniture to pay for more bits of film by the end. And the other thing is that when we did the morgue, Chris Eccleston had to be in one of these drawers in the morgue. And we put him on it, and he was naked with a sheet over him. And we pushed him in, and he panicked. And he came pushing back out. I said, what's wrong? He said, there were other bodies in there. And there were, because although the drawers at the front, the fridge is just a full fridge, and there are various bodies. And this was a working morgue. And you couldn't take them out because they decompose if we took them out for a day's filming. And he said, I can't, Danny. And he's quite a tough guy, Chris Eccleston. And he's really freaked out. Because it wasn't because when the camera pulled away and the drawer was shut, he had to stay there for 45 seconds on his own while the camera kept running and we ran the credits, which is how the film ends. So eventually we said, well, listen, we'll put somebody in there with you. And we've taken it out of the film, but on the original soundtrack, you can hear when the door closes, you can hear this person speaking to Chris saying, you're going to be all right, Chris, everything's going to be fine. You can hear them whispering to him. There you go.
So Chris Eccleston was naked underneath the sheet?
Yeah.
He wasn't wearing shorts or something?
No, he would be naked, because I think at one point we were going to pull it off. And they're quite... Ewan McGregor is in that, was always showing off his cock. He was always like, oh yeah. And there was another guy in it, Keith Allen, who's in it. He's a very famous, funny guy in Britain. He was naked in it a lot as well. He loved being naked.
The way you use nudity in your films is quite interesting in the sense that you use it for shock effect. They're an interesting shock effect. There's a nude scene in this one as well where Kerry Fox comes out of the bathroom topless. Yeah, but she does it to shut Ewan McGregor up.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's the same thing that happens in Trance where there's a good reason why the actor is naked.
Yeah. I tend to try that it's got to be equal, because obviously, you try and find a balance so that there's male and female. If you're going to use nudity, you don't just use it female nudity, which is obviously the old standby, that you tend to share it out, really. So, and it's obviously it's harder for some actors than other actors to do it. But yeah, most people get on with it, really. Yeah.
You didn't pull a Paul Verhoeven and strip naked yourself.
No, I didn't do any of that, no. Is that what he does?
Yeah, he did it on, I can't remember the space film. Yeah, Starship Troopers, exactly. Thank you
Very
very
good
much.
film. Starship Troopers, wasn't it?
Yeah. One other thing, the criminals in the film, they hardly speak. They're virtually mute. What was the reason for that?
It was just that they were a threat. What was not, it wasn't that they had a backstory or that you could explain them in any way. They were just a threat in the film, you know, that they were a force field that was threatening them. And that all that mattered was the three people in the flat and how they were going to behave. And they turned out to be much more frightening. Certainly Chris Eccleston was much more frightening than these thugs who appeared to be the threat at the beginning. So the real menace was actually contained within those three people at the beginning who humiliate that nice young man, Cameron, you know, and just make fun of him. They're the monsters in a way. That was always the idea of it, that they were the three who were capable of anything, really. And that's John, the doctor, the screenwriter. That was his opinion of all of us. It's a very bleak Scottish view that we're terrible, really, and that we're capable of any kind of monster-type behaviour.
Yeah. You have this bleakness in this film. You also have it on Trainspotting, because that's also a story about betrayal among friends. Then you made a film called Life Less Ordinary, which was a romantic comedy of sorts that flopped completely, apart from in...
Yes, it was a bit. I can't remember where it was. There's a rule in there used to be a rule. It's changed now because of streaming, I'm sure. But there used to be a rule in film distribution that if you had a hit, like a massive hit, there'd always be one place where it was a flop and nobody could understand why. There'd always be one territory, like Slovakia, where it was a big flop and nobody went to see it. And the converse is true as well. That when you had a huge flop, which is, as you're very kind to point out, Life Less Ordinary was. There's always one place, like Slovakia, where it's a huge hit for some reason and nobody can understand it why. It's very interesting, that film. So like, do you know this expression? I feel terrible because I can't speak any French or Flemish. I do apologise, or Dutch. And so I'm speaking in English. But there's a phrase in English which was the title of that film, and it's A Life Less Ordinary. And it's used now a lot. You see it a lot in advertising. They use that phrase or bastardizations of it. You know, like when they're advertising their flats, they go flat less ordinary and things like that. That phrase that's the first time it was ever used in the title of that film. And it was John's phrase, you know, he made it up as a title. Because I remember everybody said, that's an insane title. And it may be one of the reasons that the film was a terrible flop. Apart from in Slovakia.
No, apart from in Belgium. It was Belgium where it was a hit.
Was it here?
Yeah.
Oh.
It was #1 for 3 weeks.
Was it? Oh, well done, everybody. If you went to see it.
We're a very weird country.
Oh, you said that over. I'd forgotten it was Belgium. Was it? Anyway, we went to see John and I. So John lives in a place called Bath now in England, where Ken Loach lives, actually, funnily enough. And the Bath have a film festival like this, except it's a rather more gentler affair than this film festival. The stuff they show, it's very Jane Austen kind of thing. Anyway, they showed a couple of films of his, and he said, "Will you come down and watch them?" And we watched Life Less Ordinary together. And listen, I'm very self-deprecating about my work, but Life Less Ordinary is quite good. I watched it, and it was quite good. I was like, it's all right, actually. And obviously you knew more than the rest of us, than the rest of the world of Belgium. Because it's actually all right. It's quite an inventive romantic comedy.
Yeah. And then you did The Beach, which is another bleak story, because that's about a dream that explodes and turns into a nightmare. And then, strangely enough, the very first film where we had this Danny Boyle idea of things turning out fine was a horror film. It was 28 Days Later. But maybe we can watch a clip first. It's a brutal film. That is, the whole film is this, and that's why I chose this clip. The whole film is this constant clashing of paces and moods and pitches, and it must have been very difficult to edit.
No, we had an amazing editor called Chris Gill, and he loved editing it. I mean, much more so than not the normal process of enjoying your job or whatever, which comes and goes. He loved the texture of the shooting because it was shot on this very, very high shutter angle, and because the way that interacted with the video camera, it gave this very hard edge to things, which suited his editing style. So he'd constantly be chopping backward and forward. Some of these things you can see in it visibly, and some of them are almost invisible. It really suited him, his style of editing.
Yeah, but also, I mean, in terms of telling the story, where you have these very quiet moments and all of a sudden these bursts of violence and noise, how do you keep that balance?
Yeah, I think you have to try to do that to introduce, because obviously part of the joy of a horror film is the suspense about that something might happen, and then if it does happen, not being able to quite predict how it's going to happen and how you're going to be confronted with the forces around you that represent the darkness, and the demons, the monsters, whatever you want to think of or call them.
The script was written by Alex Garland, who you'd worked with on The Beach. I suppose he presented you the script there and then, or just afterwards.
So Alex was a novelist first, and his novel The Beach is the one that we adapted, but it was the guy who now lives in Bath, John Hodge, the doctor, who adapted The Beach. And Alex came out a couple of times to watch it, and he was clearly interested in making films. He was very cinematic. He wrote very cinematically anyway, so it's clear he wanted to have a go at it. And I think the result of him doing that is he turned up with a script for 28 days later, and we did some work on it, and then we set out to make it. And
What did you think when you read it?
I thought it was really good. It was very, I mean, your eyes light up. There was a short little section where he said he walks around the deserted streets of London. But it was like, it was a paragraph. It was like one scene. I thought, whoa, I'm having that. And we turned that into a kind of like a huge opening sequence like that. But it was full of delights like that, really was. And we did some work developing it, but not very much, really. It was sort of ready to go. He writes very quickly. Thinks about it for a long time, like John Hodge, that other guy, thinks about it for a long time and then writes very, very quickly. For those of us who can't really write, it's galling, because he can literally write a script in a weekend. But he's been thinking about it for months and months and months. And he and John find the typing up of it, the dialogue distribution really easy. They just like that,
There are a couple of writers who you've worked with multiple times. I think the only time that you tried it yourself was 127 hours, where you did a first draft?
Yes, yeah, we did. Yeah, we did, yeah.
What do you lack to become a good writer?
Well, I like the structure of the material and the way that it expresses itself. I'm not as good at writing dialogue. I find that very, very difficult to write the dialogue that humanizes them all, or in the case of John Hodge, makes them out to be, but entertainingly monsterish, really. I completely understand that. I can get that. I can do the structure and set up the scenarios and things like that. And I love doing that. And that's how I tend to work with writers when I work on the scripts with them. But I know my limitations, yes, for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned this scene that Alex put in the script, this very short scene of Jim walking through deserted London, which has become one of your seminal scenes in your films. Did people think you were crazy that you were trying to do that?
Shoot that scene? Yes. Yeah, but it was a very different time because we shot it in July 2001, and the reason I remember that isn't because I've got a great memory. It's because we shot it very early in the morning, we literally start shooting at 3:40 in the morning in this July, and we had a really good work week of weather. And you'd only be able to shoot for a couple of hours in London at that time. There's enough light. It's just dawning, so it's a beautiful light. And there's nobody around. There's just a few ravers coming out of clubs who find it very entertaining that a film is being made. And we had this very clever idea that we'd use very pretty girls to stop the traffic, because we didn't have the money. To get the police to stop the traffic, you have to pay them a lot of money. We didn't have that kind of budget. Mission Impossible has that kind of budget, things like that. We didn't have it. So what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to request the traffic to stop. You're allowed to ask cars, would they mind waiting here? But we thought if we get blokes to do that, it'll just be fights, because it's just blokes driving around at that time in the morning, taxi drivers and things like that, and people going to work. So we got a load of pretty girls, including my daughter, who was 18 at the time, to ask this traffic to stop. And they just lean into the car and say, excuse me, would you mind just waiting here for a minute? And it worked, and they stopped. And we managed to shoot. We had lots of these digital cameras, and we just managed to shoot the sequences. And we were very, very fortunate to do that, including in shooting near Downing Street, which is where the Prime Minister's office is and stuff like that. And in fact, we tipped over a bus there, half a bus. The top half of the bus is put in afterwards, but we tipped over the bottom half of the bus. And I remember we were shooting, we'd nearly finished the scene, and then these security guys came along. Said, what are you doing here? Like this. Oh, I said, well, I thought we had permission to turn this over here. They said, well, we can't find a permission anywhere. I said, whoa. I remember saying, well, I said, that's a terrible mistake. I said, I'm so sorry. He said, yeah, you better hurry up and finish it, because you need to leave here. This is not good. Now you get shot before they even approached you. They just gun you down now. Because 2 months later, 9/11 happened. And it weirdly flipped the film into a different focus when the film came out. It was the first film that really approached a kind of mass sense of panic, vulnerability, like the vulnerability of cities especially. Which had previously felt impregnable. You know, they just felt ever expanding. They were never going to stop. They just kept getting built bigger and bigger, and more people in it. And suddenly there was this sense of fear in cities, which you could grasp from that 9/11 thing. And it changed everything. So, and the film, I think, it's one of the reasons that the film resonated with people, I think. Because we originally made the film, but the original idea of the film was it was about road rage. That was the source of it. You know that moment where you just lose it? You're driving and you just think, shit! You know, that moment where it's just like, and we thought, what about if you expand that feeling into an infection and it just dominates you entirely the whole time? It's not just something that happens to you for a few seconds and then backs off. It's something that you cannot get rid of. We thought that's the infection. But actually, by the time the film came out, it was something much bigger than that, about how vulnerable everybody was to something.
Did you ever consider pushing it even further in the sense that the infected might lose all their inhibitions and start, attacking people in a sexual way as well?
Well, we did. So I can't remember what they're called. When we were setting it up, we were talking to various artists about how we should manifest the infected, what they should look like. And what are they called, the brothers? What are the brothers called in British art? Do you know the brothers, what are they called? They're two...
The Tates?
Chapman, Jake and Dinos Chapman. They're Chapman brothers. I don't know whether you've ever seen their art. They do all those little figures of the Gestapo and things like that, really. They're part of the kind of like Saatchi art movement, British art movement. I remember talking to them, and they said, they should all be men, and they should all have raging hard-ons running around the set like that. So we didn't do that idea, as it happens. But it was you thought, oh yeah, that would be pretty scary for everyone involved. But we didn't do that in the end, no. Yeah.
Did you enjoy the scene where you see Manchester burn?
Oh yes, no, it was great to go up the M6 and to burn Manchester, yeah. Yeah, there you go, on the horizon.
Did you get any remarks on that from the people who you knew from back when?
Oh, no, we didn't go anywhere near Manchester, in fact. What we did is we drove up we got a rolling roadblock with the police. That was all very... Yeah, we got an enormous amount of cooperation in the way of making it. I don't think you get it now. Health and safety now is so dominant as an element. everything, and when you make films, is checked and has to be supervised by so many people. It's extraordinary the way that the industry has changed since then, the stuff we got away with then.
The film is basically a road movie.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to get a consistent atmosphere on set, the kind of camaraderie you need to make a film?
Good actors, again, it's all about 90% of the film is good actors. I mean, any kind of drama that you watch. If the acting's terrible, you just lose interest in it. You know, unless you've got a kind of peripheral interest for any other reason, it's always about good actors. And we were very lucky to get Brendan Gleeson to play the dad, and, you know, Killian and Naomi, and a wonderful bunch of people to work with.
There was a lot of fan fiction that was published after 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. Did you follow any of that?
I'm not really inclined that way. I don't really. Alex is more a bit of an expert on that and tends to kind of keep an eye on it and stuff like that. But I believe he cooperated or helped the guy who wrote The Last of Us, which was the original game, was apparently inspired by the film 28 Days Later. And it has now become obviously a TV series, yeah, based on the game. But I think he knows that guy who developed the game for that they developed the TV series from, yeah.
Yeah. Did you know there are already 2 films called 28 Years Later?
Is there?
Look it up. There's
Yeah,
a short film and then a long film.
Yeah, I know there's people, and they do posters and stuff like that. It's amazing. I mean, we're very lucky. You benefit from it. There's a paranoia about you, but then you benefit from it because it clearly shows the appetite is there for people to see it. So I hope when they see the film, I hope it's not what they expect, in a good way.
And then you worked with Alex Garland again, switched genre, and did a science fiction film called Sunshine. Maybe you can watch the clip first.
Oh, yeah.
Have you always been a fan of science fiction?
Yeah, I love real science fiction, like hardcore science fiction, like Space Cruise and things that could conceivably happen. I'm not personally a big fan of. I just find it hard to say that in front of the present audience. I'm not a big fantasy fan as such. I like really, you know, the two divisions. So I'm not a Star Wars man. I'm a kind of like Aliens man. It's sort of that's the way I tend to put it. Yeah, no. But I'm sure there'll be others who are behind you thinking, oh, get him out of there. Anyway, yeah. So I love it, and it's curious actually that in space sci-fi, there's really, in the hardcore division, which I call this part, there's really only one story. It's amazing. There's one story, which is that there's a ship and it gets a signal from somewhere, which is not a good idea to answer that signal. But every single ship answers that signal, which is either from another ship that is, you know, from a planet that's got some terrible thing on it. You know, and it's because we haven't been in space. So until we are much more in space, we won't develop the stories, I don't think. Other than the fantasy stories, which are the Star Wars, the much more extreme, where you literally can invent anything. So real hardcore sci-fi tends to be limited, I think, until we get further and deeper into space, which we eventually will one day and develop the stories. It was really interesting doing the research. They are preparing for it, because I remember doing the research on this. It was really interesting. And we read the draft of what was going up to the space station on one mission. And some of it included pig semen. You think, what are they doing with pig semen in space? And of course, what they're doing with it is seeing whether it's affected by being in space, because at some point we will conceive in space. And they need to know that they are working on, will it have a material effect on the outcome? Zero gravity, the space environment, radiation, all that. So it's going on, all that kind of research, you know, which we won't really realize its significance for 50, 100 years or whatever, but you can see it's there, you know, in the manifesto of things that they were taking up, and in the manifest of things they were taking up then.
Yeah. You were briefly involved with the fourth Alien film. what was it not for you? Why did you come to the conclusion that this was not something you were interested in?
It was a really good script by Josh Whedon. You know, the Buffy the Vampire, you know, that a wonderful script by him. And I remember I went to meet Sigourney Weaver, which was an extraordinary experience. And she has, I don't know if you've ever met anybody with translucent skin. You're literally looking at them and you can see the veins in their skin moving, blood moving through them. I mean, literally. Maybe I was just obsessed with her, but it was unhuman, inhuman. Very beautiful woman, obviously, and a wonderful, interesting woman as well. So I met her, and I met Winona Ryder, who was going to be in it. So I was set up to do it, but I couldn't work out how to do the CG yet. It was very early days for CG, but it was obviously moving towards CG. That was the idea, away from the way that Ridley Scott had done it, with puppeteering, with kind of like Maasai warriors in the suits and things like that. The old-fashioned way of doing it. I couldn't master the CG. I've learned a lot more how to do it since then. But I lost confidence about doing that, so I pulled out of it. I thought I won't do the job very well.
Sunshine has a lot of CG as well, so what's the difference?
It's a bit easier because the CG is outside the shit. We built everything else for real. Everything else is real. That we built it all in this small studios in East London, and did it for it's made for very little money. It looks like it's worth a lot more money than it cost, which is a tribute to all the people who worked on it, the designers and the technicians, everyone.
Very little being, what, 20 million?
It was less than 20 million, yes.
Yeah.
Which it's an awful lot of money, obviously.
Yeah.
But in terms of that kind of scale of film is a lot less than you normally spend.
You have a great group of actors in this film. How did you pull them together?
It wanted an international crew, really. It felt like, as it's obviously the case, that any of these kind of missions would eventually be, there would be Asian crew, whether they were all crewed from the same country, the United States, or not, or whether they were an international crew, they'd clearly be ethnically look like a mixed crew. So it was selecting the best kind of actors. Always wanted to work with Michelle Yeoh. That was like a kind of just because of her other work. It was just and pulling together all this. Chris Evans, who's gone on to be Captain America or one of the Captain Americas, but they were all just like just making their way. Cliff Curtis is a wonderful Maori actor, really wonderful guy, and Troy Garrity, who's Jane Fonda's son, has to carry that through his life. What it's like being Jane Fonda's son. He was a wonderful guy. Yeah, they were a lovely bunch of people. Yeah, and Rose Byrne as well.
The interesting thing is that if you hadn't seen, because Cillian Murphy was not exactly really well known at the time, you couldn't tell who's the main character in the story, which is very much like Alien in a way. You don't know who the lead character is. Was that intentional?
Well, Alien is such an influence, isn't it, on anything like this? I mean, I watched it recently. It's still absolutely out there, And I saw this. Somebody showed me this interview where you had to pick your favourite scene. What was it? It was like on one of those broadcasting panels that they do for the Oscars, and it was a bunch of directors sitting around a table, and this guy said, "Well, there's been a nuclear accident, and you're allowed to say one scene from cinema, and you have to say what it is." And the clip was there because it was Quentin Tarantino saying what his favourite clip was from, and it was from one of the Hong Kong films. It was something like that. And I noticed that Ridley Scott was there as well. And then I noticed I was there as well. I'd completely forgotten this. There was a kind of moment I thought, that's me. Anyway, and I was thinking, what would I have chosen? And I thought, you should really pick the chest burster, wouldn't you? If you think about a scene. I mean, you think that scene is 40 years old, that scene. And you still watch it now, and it's like terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. He's really not been given the credit he deserves. Still, I don't think Ridley Scott.
What were some of the other science fiction classics you were bumping up against with this film?
Oh, Tarkovsky, the original Solaris, which you know, he was doing it at the same time as 2001. That's an extraordinary thing to think that he was developing that in Russia as Kubrick was doing 2001. They are kind of like magnificent. They're the giants that you're standing on the shoulders of, really. Yeah.
And how do you deal with that legacy? Do you try to be influenced, not be influenced?
It's not, it diminishes the worry about that you're in that kind of extraordinary field of competition, because the nightmare of filming in space on Earth is just, we went in the Vomit comic, not to film. We went in it actually when they publicised the film, they took all the journalists out for a day on the Vomit comic. Have any of you ever done the Vomit comic? You know, which is the weightless one. Well, if you go to Florida, you can do it. You have to be able to, it's $3,000 for a trip. But believe me, it's worth it. It'll be the best $3,000 you've ever spent. So you go up in this aircraft. The aircraft's completely sealed. It's like a 747 or something. I can't remember which plane it was, or a 737 or something. But it's reinforced, and it goes straight up like that. So it's like, and they put you in the seats at the back. So it takes off, and all the seats are crammed at the back. And all in front of you are mattresses. The whole thing is mattress. So ceiling, floor, everything. It's just mattresses. There's no windows. And you go up like that, and then when it arrives at a certain point, they say, "Yeah, okay, you can get out of the seats now," and they tell you to go and stand in the mattresses. Go, and then it does this. It goes like that at high speed, and it's at that point you become gravity free for about 18 seconds. And you lift off the floor like that. And it is the most incredible feeling. So for some of us, those of us who wear glasses, you take your glasses off like that, and they float in front of you like that as you turn your head. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. And then they say to you to be very careful, because there are lots of eye injuries that happen on these flights. And you go, and of course it says, because what happens is when you go weightless, for some reason your brain thinks you're falling, and it goes like, you go like this, and you poke people in the eye, and sure enough, the first time they did it, everyone went like this. and then you get more cut. So they do it about 18 to 20 times, this thing, like this. Oh, it's absolutely amazing. By the end, you're super confident. You're turning cartwheels, you're drinking water, you tip this water out of its bottle and it floats like mercury in front of you, and you grab it like that. But the weirdest thing is if you stand like this, as it bottoms out like that, you feel all your internal organs and your blood move through your body. And it's very sexual. Feel this. And you're looking around at people like this, saying, "Are you feeling this as well?" So I don't know whether they've had any incidents while they've been up there, but it's anyway, that's why I said it's worth $3,000 well spent.
So what you're saying is that astronauts are constantly horny.
I think they must be.
But they call it a vomit comet for a reason, right?
Yeah, there are people who find it very tricky. Yeah, there's no toilet on board, so they give you a bag with a sponge in, and they say if you have to go, you'll have to do it in the sponge, because there's no toilet, because it's doing all this kind of stuff like that. So you have to do a walk of shame. Nobody did it on the flight I was on, but it's called the walk of shame, because there's a little partition that you can go behind to fill the sponge if you feel you have to. Anyway, that's enough detail about it.
And it's $3,000, you say?
It's $3,000.
Okay. No,
I mean,
thank
it was paid for by Fox, but it's certainly, if you've got $3,000, it's well worth spending it on that, yeah.
Yeah. You got the great Brian Cox on board for this film, for Sunshine. Not the actor, he's a physicist, right? Yeah. As a scientific advisor. What was his main contribution to the film?
He took Killian to CERN, to the particle accelerator at CERN, you know, where they fire the atoms around the particle accelerator. And he took him there to give him all the background of all the physics background. Do you know him here? Is he on the telly a lot? He's a great television physicist, or you see him on YouTube a lot as well.
We see documentaries of his on TV sometimes. Yeah, he looks like a rock star, basically.
Yeah, he looks like Killian. I said they look alarmingly alike, the two of them. Yeah, and they're very Peter Panish. They don't seem to age. Although Killian has aged, I have to tell you, when you eventually see him in the 28 years later universe, he looks a little older than he used to.
Is it true that the digital effects took a full year to complete?
They do take, I mean, I'm sure it'd be quicker now, but it did take forever back then to get those. You know what you showed in the clips at the beginning, the guy burning on the stuff like that took forever, yeah, for sure.
How do you keep interested for that long?
We just kept editing, and what we should have done is, I believe, what most people do, which is that you stop and just take 6 months off and go away and kind of wait and then come back. But we kept editing and editing and editing, kept working, which you get beyond saturation level. It's very difficult the space stuff is very difficult because there's a great saying, Bernardo Bertolucci, the great Italian director, said, you should always leave a door open on your set for real life to come in. What he meant was like the accidents, the things that you bump into as part of making the film. You know, you meet someone, you introduce them into the film, they become a character in the film and things like that. Of course, when you go into space, you can't do that. If you leave the door open, you all die because of the vacuum. But so you literally you are hermetically sealed into the world. You have to take everything with you on the journey. It's just extraordinary. I mean, space is very hostile, and it's certainly not easy to film the idea of being in space either.
At the time of the release, you said sci-fi never again. You sticking with that?
I think I would, yeah. The problem is that you're the problem, the audience. Your standards of what you believe and don't believe as an audience are so high, and you're constantly aware of that. You know, because for instance, there's no slow motion in space, but we all think there is because of Kubrick and the pen in 2001. We all think in space things move like that. In fact, when I did the glasses, I think I did it in slow motion like that. It's not in slow motion. If anything, it's quicker. There's less resistance, so movement is actually quicker. But if you do that in a space film, people don't believe it. They think that's not happening in space. It really isn't. It's far too quick. Things are in slow motion in space. It's just bizarre. Anyway, so it's really finding that line between what's real and what's not real, and what people, the audience, us, believe. You know, our judgment standards of it.
And then in 2013, you made Trance, which is another genre. Again, it's a kind of a mix between a heist film and a psychological thriller. Even though it sounds like a comedy, if you try to summarize it, because it's about an art thief who forgets where he put the painting. Yeah. But before we talk about that, let's look at a clip. Yeah, I thought that would play well here. Do you enjoy shooting that kind of gory scene?
Well, it was meant to. So what we were doing, we got employed to do the Olympic opening ceremony for the London Olympic Games in 2012, and it was such a long. Those jobs take so long. It's like over 2 years to do. That I remember negotiating with the Olympic Committee that we were going to shoot a film at the same time, and it was meant to be a lot of fun. You know, like a kind of fun film that we'd make. Anyway, we made that. We ended up making that, which was a very tortured psychological film, which I think probably tells you more about what it's like to direct the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. It's actually what happens to your brain while you're doing it, while you're trying to do that kind of thing. So we shot that at the same time, in and around the same area in London as we were doing the Olympic Games. So one day we do the filming, and then the other day we do the opening ceremony, and we'd flip-flop like that. Yeah.
But do you enjoy shooting that kind of a gory scene?
Oh God, yes. Yeah. I mean, I love action. I really do love action. I love the kinetic sense of cinema. You were saying about the choir earlier. and that is a huge part of the kinetic side of cinema, but I love the propulsive, kinetic form of storytelling that cinema is, that literally in its essence, it's constantly moving forward, and that you're constantly pushed forward with it. It's not really a reflective medium. It's something that's always pushing forward for the next element of the story. It's kind of greedy for whatever's coming next. I love that appetite it has.
And is that the reason also why you found this particular story interesting?
It was just a wonderful, it was a wonderful kind of fun I'd always wanted to do a kind of fun psychological thriller, really, which is what we tried to make it be, with a good casting. And Vince Cassell, Rosario Dawson, and McAvoy, wonderful actors to work with in it. Yeah.
It's a very complex piece. I mean, it's very difficult to keep to keep following the story as a spectator. Were you confident that you would be able to pull that off? I mean, everything gets explained in the end, but to keep the audience engaged while telling the story.
Yes, well, obviously that's what you aim for and you hope so. But I think it's also, I think the way the film turned out at the end, it shows you your sanity level when you are directing the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. It is, it's just like it, and that got reflected in the film, weirdly enough, in a strange way that you can't really control. Yeah.
Okay, I just got a signal that we have to stop, unfortunately,
Okay.
which is too bad because I wanted to show a clip of your Frankenstein theatre piece as well, because you do that as well. But people can look it up if they want to. Anyway, everybody's looking forward to 20 years later, I think. That's the first thing that's coming up. Any other horror, science fiction thrillers that you have in the pipeline?
There's a wonderful story. It's a novel I'd recommend to you and it's called Ingenious Pain. You've ever heard of it? No. It's by a British writer called Andrew Miller, who is one of the great. He's sort of he's not famous like Martin Amis or Ian McEwan or people like that. But if you want an interesting, if you read in English it's probably published, I imagine it's published in French and maybe in Flemish, I don't know, but in Dutch, I suppose. But anyway, it's about a boy who feels no pain, a boy who's born who feels no pain, which apparently is a true condition and a very, very dangerous condition. But in the story, it's set in Georgian Britain, and because of his ability to feel no pain, he becomes a surgeon, one of the early surgeons, when they were operating without anaesthetic, obviously, because he's also able to feel no empathy for other people's pain as he operates on them. So I'd love to make that story one day.
It sounds a bit like a perfume.
It's wonderful, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out to come here, and good luck with 20 years later.
Thank you very much.
And a big round of applause for Danny Brown.